Shūdōkan begins with a school teacher from Shuri who believed karate should not be split into competing labels. Kanken Toyama grew up in the old castle town of Okinawa and studied under Anko Itosu for many years, long enough to be trusted as an assistant at the Okinawa Teachers College and to be regarded, alongside Gichin Funakoshi, as one of Itosu's closest protégés. He started training as a child, and the method that later bore the name of his Tokyo dojo was built on that Shuri-te foundation rather than declared a new invention. In his own writing and interviews, he pushed the idea that karate had no styles, only training lines and teachers, which is why Shūdōkan was simply the hall for the study of the way of karate, not a stamped brand. After years in Okinawa, Toyama moved to Taiwan during the Japanese colonial period, taught in an elementary school, and sought out Chinese boxing. He studied forms of Chuanfa and taijiquan that stressed circular energy, whole-body power, and soft, hard transitions. When he returned to Japan, he opened his Tokyo dojo on March 20th of 1930. The Shudokan was his vehicle to teach what he had learned from Itosu and from Chinese teachers, and he maintained that he was not founding a separate sect. The dojo name described a place to study rather than a new denomination. The pre-war Shūdōkan drew students from Japan, Okinawa, and Korea. That mixed cohort mattered when the war ended and the Allied occupation placed heavy restrictions on martial arts. To keep practice alive, Toyama's senior students organized training under a new banner at Kuden in Tokyo. They called it Kanbukan, the Hall of Korean Martial Arts, and appointed the Korean teacher Yoon Kwai-byung as director. That choice was shrewd, because a Korean director could operate with fewer political obstacles in the early occupation. Training continued in basics and kata, and they introduced armored-free sparring using kendo gear so that strikes could land at full power with reduced risk. In the early 1950s, when the bans eased, Kanbukan became Renbukan. In 1954, they staged a landmark national championship in Tokyo under Bogu Kumite rules, one of the first major post-war karate tournaments in Japan. Shūdōkan also stood at a crossroads that linked Okinawan karate to the emerging Korean schools. Among Toyama's students were Yoon Byung-in, who later led the YMCA Kwanbop-bu that became Changmu Kwan, and Kim Ki-wang, who went on to teach widely after the war. The Kanbukan and later Renbukan circles also saw visitors like Mas Oyama, whose own path toward full-contact karate intersected with the armored sparring culture that Toyama's group helped normalize. Through these people, Shūdōkan's technical habits and its open exchange attitude fed into both Japanese full-contact currents and the Korean Kwan era that preceded the formal unification of Taekwondo. In 1959, Renbukan and allied leaders helped assemble a unifying federation under the Old Japan Karate-do Federation name, with Toyama's Shūdōkan serving as overall headquarters. That federative experiment later ceded the JKF name to a new non-contact umbrella in the mid-1960s, while Renbukai continued as the Armored Karate Group. The administrative reshuffling matters because it shows again how Toyama positioned Shūdōkan not as a closed lineage but as a hub that welcomed many lines and rule sets. Technically, Shūdōkan is recognized for large circular actions that cover the center line before striking. Think of the forearms and hands drawing arcs that shield the torso and head as the hips turn and the stance shifts. So the first contact absorbs or shears the attack offline, and the second beat delivers the counter. Where a strictly linear style might fire down a straight track, Shūdōkan often wraps, guides, and then crashes back in. The body mechanics ask for long, extended motions that teach power through range, then compress into shorter applications in close. That mix gives you the look of a wave gathering and breaking, a rounded catch on entry, a torquing hip, and a decisive finish into the opponent's balance. The same logic supports clinch skills. Because you enter on a covering line, it is common to redirect into a throw, a sweep, a choke, or a joint lock as the counter. For students listening without visuals, imagine parrying a straight punch with a sweeping outside line, the forearm overlaying the incoming limb, the rear foot stepping slightly past the attacker's lead, and the counter not as a single punch but as a wrap into the neck, a knee bump to the thigh, and a shoulder-driven twist that puts the attacker down. The training rhythm alternates soft interception with hard resolution, which is exactly what Toyama admired in both Shuri-te and the Chinese forms he studied. Shūdōkan kata reflect this blend. The curriculum embraces the Shuri-te family that Toyama inherited from Itosu, including the Pinan series and the Naihanchi line, along with Tamari-linked forms like Rohai, Shinto, and Wanshu, and commonly shared standards such as Basai and Kushanku. Renbukai materials that descend from the Shūdōkan hub list these forms alongside others, and different Shūdōkan lines also maintain their own kata with the same circular covering character. If you picture the opening of a kushanku variant performed with a broad catching motion across the body rather than a sharp block, you are close to the Shūdōkan feel. The aim is to learn how a large circle can hide a short strike or set a throw, not to draw circles for their own sake. Training, as it came down from Toyama, balances kihon that build extension and posture with partner work that makes the covering lines real. In practice, that means drilling long trajectories to cultivate leg drive and hip turn, then compressing the same pathways in yakusoku kumite and in GU exchanges with armor when a school uses that format. Throws and clinch defenses are not an afterthought. The covering entries encourage standing grappling the moment distance closes, and the historical Renbukan environment rewarded students who could bridge safely, hit decisively, and topple an opponent without abandoning striking form. Several people anchor the story of Shūdōkan after the war. Hiroshi Kinjo taught and researched within the Kanbukan and Renbukan circles, and later became known for careful historical work that preserved connections back to Okinawa. Yun Kwai Byung provided political cover and leadership in the fragile early occupation years and returned to Korea before the war on the peninsula escalated. Yoon Byung-in took Toyama's lessons into a Korean setting and became one of the figures through whom Chinese and Okinawan methods blended in Seoul's post-war dojang scene. Hold on for a second. Thank you for watching my videos. If you enjoy what I do, you can support my project via clicking the Join Sponsor button on YouTube. That way you can get early access to my new videos before anyone else. You are also going to get access to my Daido Juku Kudo Karate courses. Now, let's get back to the video. Toshi Hanaue maintained the original Shūdōkan line in Japan for decades after Toyama's passing. The common thread is Toyama's open posture. He awarded instructor titles across a broad network. Some of those students later founded their own schools, and the name Shūdōkan continued both as a specific dojo memory and as a technical flavor that you can still recognize. Shūdōkan today does not operate as a single, tightly centralized school. The original Tokyo dojo is long closed, and the lineage spread into multiple organizations. You will find Shūdōkan line schools in Japan, the United States, and elsewhere, often preserving kata lists that look very close to the Renbukai register, and a teaching style that emphasizes circle and cover mechanics. Renbukai itself remains active as a competition body for armored karate in Japan, while Shūdōkan teachers outside that circuit keep the kata and partner practice without necessarily adopting armor. In both cases, you can still feel Toyama's refusal to confine karate to one rigid template. If you had to sum up the style and motion for a listener, you would say that Shūdōkan looks like Shuri-te that has learned to breathe in circles. The stance work teaches long drive. The hips turn through arcs rather than only snapping in straight lines, and the hands are trained to arrive as shields that become strikes or grips. The kata inventory keeps the classic Okinawan backbone, but the way those forms are interpreted favors covering entries, offline steps, and the seamless choice between a finishing strike and a short throw. That is the Toyama signature, wide enough to welcome different lines, concrete enough that you can recognize it as soon as someone bridges with a rounded catch and makes you feel, a heartbeat later, the hard stop of the counter.